And Ben will cue me into when to start, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Just once we've got it shared, everything. It's still setting up the meeting on YouTube Live,
Okay.
but that should happen quite quickly.
And Ben, I'm going to stay on chat so that you can chat with me, yeah?
We're online, the live stream.
Right. And Ben will cue me into when to start, yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Just once we've got it shared, everything. It's still setting up the meeting on YouTube Live,
Okay.
but that should happen quite quickly.
Good afternoon from Singapore. So thank you, 7 Clean Seas, for inviting me to moderate this important panel on a very important topic that affects all our lives, you know, and that of our future generations. For some context, the way I came into this picture is I came across 7 Clean Seas when I was introduced to Tom Peacock Nazil by Andrew Dixon, who's the owner of the Nicoy Cempedak Islands, whose furloughed workers had been employed by 7 Clean Seas to clean the beaches of Bintan. And I just thought that it was such a brilliant initiative, you know, that it gives income to tourism workers that have been affected by COVID-19. It addresses a real problem of plastic waste on our beaches, and it gives corporates an opportunity to be part of a problem, part of a solution. And I've always believed that travel and tourism, which is an industry I have been part of for a long time, has such an important role to play in the issue of environmental sustainability, because no other industry is able to spread as far and wide and as deep into local communities. So of course, for now, travel and tourism is taking a break. And so it's a really good time for us to be addressing this topic of a plastic ocean, an Indonesian perspective. And we are very, very happy to have with us the speakers. We have Tom Peacock Nazil, who's the CEO and founder of 7 Clean Seas. We have Anya Phelan, Research Fellow and the Academic Accord Coordinator for the Global Change Scholars Program. We have Stefan Kraus, who's the Professor of Eco-Hydrology and Biogeochemistry, calling in from Birmingham. And then we have Wawa, Professor Wawa at ITS, which is the Institute Technology Sepuluh November dari Surabaya. So welcome to the panelists. How are you all today?
Hi.
Good. Calling in from Birmingham, Singapore, Brisbane, and Surabaya. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this discussion into 4 parts for the audience that is watching. Firstly, we want to understand the issue of plastic pollution in Indonesia. Secondly, we want to appreciate the impact of COVID-19 clearly, which has impacted everything in our lives. 3, we want to understand the responsibilities of different stakeholders. And 4, we want to see if we can brainstorm for ideas or to recommend solutions from the panelists to help mitigate the waste management situation in Indonesia. So without further ado, you know, you can ask questions as well, but without further ado, let me get into the panel, and we're going to begin with a brief introduction from the panelists, basically telling us who you are, what institution you're from, why do you care about this, and why should other people care about it? Let's start with Anya.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the invite. I'm delighted to be part of this panel. I am with the business school at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia, and I've recently completed a study in South Sulawesi. In fact, it was Southeast Sulawesi and Southwest Sulawesi, examining factors contributing to plastic pollution in coastal communities. So we focus on typical coastal villages that represent thousands, if not tens and hundreds of thousands of similar villages around the archipelago in Indonesia, and issues and really the mental models of the communities around this very global, complex environmental problem. And so what we really wanted to do is look at through the lens of the eyes of the people who are inundated, not just by coastal seasonal monsoons and storms, but also just daily challenges around waste management in regions with minimal waste infrastructure and collection.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And we go to Stefan.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. My name is Stefan Krause, and I'm leading the Water Council at our Institute of Global Innovation, where we try to tackle wicked water problems around the world. One of them being the issue of plastic pollution in the environment, what causes it, what the impacts are, and how we can mitigate or prevent it. And one of my main personal motivations for working on this is that I think our life and COVID now, the current pandemic shows that our life relies so much on plastics and probably as we have seen over the last couple of months, also a lot of single-use plastic, actually in particular in the medical sector, that makes our life safer. On the other hand, we are creating a waste legacy that's pretty similar to nuclear waste will last for generations, probably not as long as nuclear waste, but it will definitely affect my daughter's life. It will definitely affect her children's lives. And with us working predominantly on plastic pollution, not just in coastal areas and the oceans, but really plastic pollution also in the contributing rivers and lands, we try to take a systems approach and really looking into how plastics are entering the environment, what society can do to prevent that, to reduce and mitigate that, and how can we start already on the sources by reducing the source inputs, in addition to thinking about clever ways like Tom and Ben are doing in the 7 Clean Cities, about thinking about how in a clever way to actually do targeted cleanup operations.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I mean, we'll come to that, to the clever ways that we're addressing the problem, but certainly, in Singapore too, we've definitely seen a rise in single plastic use because of COVID, right? With all the takeaway food and all that. So that's, that sort of brought the problem to the surface. So let's go to Professor Wawa, and you're in Surabaya, which is still in the midst of a lockdown situation. How are you? And tell us, what your institution is doing around plastic pollution in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the inviting me to come to this event, especially. My name is, as mentioned previously, you can call me Wawa. Okay, and so right now I'm lectures in the Department of Environmental Engineering in ITS, and also the head of the research center from the Center of Infrastructures and Sustainable Environment. And for me, especially as mentioned previously, that right now the condition in Surabaya, especially because the number of the cases for COVID is still increased, okay? And then we have a big problem with the waste also, especially for the plastic waste that maybe we can discuss it after this, especially. For me, especially, I will work with the reducing land-based leakage, because I'm not only work for the plastic that go to the ocean or marine debris, no, but we are also work with the land-based leakage. So we try to prevent the solid waste to throw to the river, because we are now the condition in Indonesia, especially for behavior change, is a big problem also in Indonesia. And why I care about this, and I would like to work with this one, because I think this is just a little step from me, especially to dedicate to save of our world, because we are now the plastic waste is a big problem right now, and we already know from the many of research that Indonesia is one of the big polluter for the plastic waste in the ocean. So it's why then we need to move step by step, try to tackling this kind of problem. And why people need to hear about this one, because this is our responsibility for the sustainability to live in our planet for future, especially for the children and also grandchildren. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Terima kasih for that. That little small step means a lot to addressing a huge issue. So now we go to Tom. If you explain why you care so much about this.
I don't know where to start. Thank you very much, Suhoon, for moderating this panel today. To be honest, it is absolutely an honor, even though we are hosting it at 7 Clean Cities, it's an absolute honor to share the stage with these academics who are so kind of highly regarded within the space of ocean plastic pollution, plastic leakage, and essentially everything that we do care about. I started out with no background, no academic background, having, well, relevant to this subject, if I'll be totally honest, at the beginning of 2018. I started just out of passion. I have lived in Asia for a long time. I was very upset with the levels of plastic leakage and plastic pollution seemingly everywhere. It's not just an Indonesian problem. It's everywhere in the world to an extent. But particularly in Southeast Asia and South Asia, it is very prominent. And I wanted to engage communities on a grassroots level to get them engaged with the issue in a tangible, hands-on manner so that they can actually make that connection, that physical connection between ocean plastic pollution and their own consumption habits and their own waste management habits as well. As time has progressed, obviously I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people, learn a lot, read many papers. And really, we at 7 Clean Seas have identified one of the biggest culprits of ocean plastic pollution as just waste management economics, the way they traditionally are. They don't unfortunately work. And I think the figure in the recent System IQ study was that 2 billion people in this world don't have access to waste collection, which is, it goes beyond shock. It's just not acceptable. We've got to find a way. And I think Wara just summed it up perfectly. You know, it's our responsibility. We want to live on this earth. We want to pass it on to the future generations. And we want to make sure that we're not deteriorating it at a kind of, I keep calling it a runaway train with kind of single-use plastic, because that's what it feels like sometimes. We have a responsibility. If you love the world, and you absolutely should do, we should care about ocean plastic pollution as well as the other crises that are going on simultaneously.
So you're kind of approaching it from a layman's perspective, and then bringing in sort of your business hat to try and see how you can solve this problem with economics. You know, I mean, when I spoke to you, and you know, we're going to hear from the researchers on what they're seeing from their perspective. But you know, there was a number that you shared, which was like 11 million metric tons of plastic enter the ocean every year.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of a scale, and the most recent study that's come out has kind of suggested that that's 11 million metric tons. What scares me more is the trajectory of the way things are going, and that if things carry on as they are now, even with the government efforts in terms of what they've already committed to, that is going to almost triple by 2040 to almost 29 million metric tons per year. And I mean, the big numbers, people can't really always visualize big numbers. So just think about this. 29 million metric tons is 50 kilograms for each meter of coastline globally every single year. That is terrifying. We need to do something about this. We cannot let that become the norm in 2040.
Right. So Stefan, you know, coming over to you, when you hear a number like that, and I'm sure in your research, you must come across masses of data that are quite terrifying. How do you get your head around that? And, you know, how do we even start to even address this problem? Like, you know, Professor Wawa is saying, you know, how do you take the first small step?
Yeah, let me add an even more scary number, which is 10 times as high, which is the amount of, well, more than 10 times as high, the amount of mismanaged plastic waste that enters the environment every year, which is in 2010 has been more than 120 million metric tons. It has since then just increased. So that means the problem, I think we start to understand the problem is of a complexity that, of course, a lot of things visualize and we become apparent of them in coastal areas, in the oceans, and in particular with regard to macroplastic. But the big question is, where do all that other amount of plastic waste that gets mismanaged, where does that end up? And that's really hard to identify, because you for that need to identify what are the sources, but also what are the transport mechanisms for that, and what happens in between. Where does it get buried? We try to tackle that problem by looking from very local approaches up to really global, applying global models and trying to identify the hotspots based on global models that take into account mismanaged plastic waste, deposition by a country factor. There's information out there, luckily, about the state of waste management in different countries, and you can look into that. And we try to use our hydrological routing models to basically show how plastic waste that gets produced is getting mismanaged, and how it starts to accumulate in catchments, and how does it start to end up in the seas. Because one thing that we are quite concerned about is, we are very concerned about the macroplastics that you can see and about the impacts of that. But one thing we are in addition particularly concerned about are micro and nanoplastics, which are much smaller. They're only visible for you to see if you're really looking. Like some of them are big enough that you could see them just with a bare eye. They are in the lower millimeter scale, but the majority is so small you would only see them under a microscope. But that means that they're much more mobile, that they are able to reach very wider than macroplastics. That also means they are posing a risk for being taken up in food webs, and they're posing a risk in being taken up by humans. And there's a growing body of evidence of us taking up a significant amount of microplastics through our diet, just starting of an understanding of what we take up through inhalation as well, which affects our respiratory systems, of course.
So yeah,
so
that's
a very different scale.
I know. So that's even more terrifying, and from the data that Tom has shared. And you know, as a consumer, I mean, that's terrifying. But you know, let's bring it back to Indonesia then, and sort of go to Anya and tell me the research that you are doing in South Sulawesi, and what are you seeing? Are you seeing some terrifying numbers as well? And should we all give up hope, or you know, is there a chance of turning the tide in some small way at all, Anya?
So, like, it's a great question and difficult to answer. And I just like to bring it back to Tom in that sense that the passion around this issue it's extraordinary. And I found, actually, was on a different project around sustainable livelihoods and strengthening coastal management in Selayar, South Sulawesi. And the plastics issue completely took over my existence. And I actually could not, I realized it was really something that was a non-starter, and so which led to this recent study and then subsequent 2 studies I'm in the midst of. But to get back to that, see, I'm looking, and what our finding has revealed. So we use the systems approach as well, and looking at mental models and looking at doing everything from mass flows to beach transects to understanding using essentially focus groups to align balancing and reinforcing loops from a systems perspective. But really what we concluded is that the communities are shouldering the impacts of this crisis, and the communities are burdened with something that they actually had very little to do with to start with. The producers and manufacturers distributing and selling to the regions, not just in Indonesia, but other places around the world with minimal waste infrastructure, are increasing single-use packaging and processed food at an exponential rate. And coastal communities with minimal waste infrastructure really require circular systems and responsible supply chains. At the moment, there's very little communities can do, despite best efforts around behavioral science-based initiatives around sorting and collection, unless they're presented with better choice architecture. When waste collection infrastructure is limited, in our findings and conclusions, it's really the role of producer responsibility to ensure that the products that they sell do not end up in the ocean. And we're talking about scary numbers, and plastic production is expected to double by 2030. It's actually expected to triple by 2050. And with all the hard work that is being done on the beaches and cleanups and the technological shift around recycling, we know that we cannot recycle and clean our way out of this massive problem. So I'm really personally focused on well, it's a multi-pronged approach, but looking at it both from the source and end of pipe, and working closely with the producers to shift this really exponential increase on the communities who can, and really across the world, who who cannot manage the inflow, and it's just outpacing any mitigation efforts that are available. And so, don't want to add to the scary numbers, but
sure.
Those are
So if I were to try and sort of connect it basically, we have three areas. We have, plastic waste that's just being used by consumers. And then, Stefan, you talked about the mismanaged plastic waste management, which is an even bigger problem. And then Anya, you talked about plastic production by companies, and that it should be the responsibility of companies to watch their plastic production, right, which is expected to triple by 2050. So which area should we the problem is so huge. So which part of the problem are you trying to solve with waste management economics? Because only money seems to matter. Like money talks, right? So somehow you got to have that money thing making sense in this. So Tom, how are you addressing it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we live in a world where if something makes profit, it works, it scales, it gets implemented. Now we've got to look at just the traditional economics of waste management here and think, okay, well, what actually is waste management? It's a business. It's not an NGO. It's not a charity. They are there to collect material value from essentially harvesting plastic. We're looking at plastic for this example. So when you're in a high urban location, this is easy. You've got a high urban population, high kind of plastic density within a small area, which means it's quite easy to collect a high volume of plastic. You take that plastic to somewhere where you aggregate it, you then sort it, you take those different polymer streams and you put that through to kind of supplementary kind of recycling or processing. And it's at that point that you get paid, and that payment that you receive for that material as it's going into recycling or out the other end of recycling has to then disseminate down the entire chain and pay for the infrastructure that was required to collect and aggregate and sort that plastic. Now, that is great for kind of high urban areas, maybe primary, secondary tier settlements. The second you get out of these areas and you get into rural locations, island locations, this is when we're seeing a complete breakdown of the system. It doesn't make economic sense. When you're in an island and rural location, population is low, population density is low, geographical spread is high, therefore the cost of collection is really high. Now, if cost of collection is high and volumes are low, I mean, that's the wrong way for both ends of the scale. It's going to result in a really high cost product. So you use waste management, you aggregate all of the plastic. This plastic costs a lot of money to aggregate. We then try and process that through recycling technology, and we realize that actually we're competing against virgin plastic, which is worth essentially nothing. And you're trying to convince people to take kind of recycled plastic, which is harder to work with, it's more expensive, when it's easier for them just to take kind of virgin plastic. So not only are you more expensive, you're less desirable as well. So the whole thing just unravels and falls apart. So kind of what we decided to do is, instead of trying to, I mean, we do a lot of cleanup, and we've got projects where we're building infrastructure in Indonesia and looking at river cleanup technology, but we want to get right down to the root cause of this issue, which is economics. How do we find a model that can successfully fund waste management in island and rural locations? A model that can be scalable anywhere around the world, that anyone or any kind of waste management company can implement. And that really led us in 2018 to developing plastic offsetting. People have mixed reviews on offsetting. Carbon offsetting has really not done the best job in terms of keeping the critiques at bay, because it's just almost too cheap. But that's a discussion for another day. Plastic offsetting in itself is an opportunity to decouple material value from waste management investment. And all of a sudden, if we can decouple this and say, well, it actually doesn't matter if I'm selling my plastic for a loss, because I've got a third-party funding mechanism over here that's going to pay for the infrastructure. All of a sudden, we've created a financial model that makes waste management, collection and aggregation and sorting in these island rural locations absolutely feasible, absolutely feasible. Now, it needs to be embraced. It needs to be kind of pushed out there. We spent 2 years with people calling us crazy. Now all the big players are looking at this. There is something coming out. I think Anya mentioned that something called extended producer responsibility, that is a regulatory kind of mechanism which is going to essentially tax companies to recover the same quantity of plastic from the geographical location that they're putting it into. Our issue with EPR strategies is that, again, they're looking for return on investment. That money will fall into these high urban locations. And again, we're going to end up with the rural and island locations getting left out. So what I really want to see now, and it's, you know, we're making kind of big strides in this industry. There are certifications and standards coming out in the next year or two. Big companies are looking at it. Even the oil and gas companies are looking at it. I mean, and that says everything, right? But the idea is that it needs to work in unison with EPR, because this is the only way to push infrastructure into these locations that are like low volume and island locations, essentially.
Okay, so it's getting corporations to take responsibility for you know, the waste management economics of rural and island communities. Let's go to Professor Wawa then and get your perspective on that. You know, I mean, do you see that model working for Indonesia? Do you see that as a solution, or have you seen any other solutions that have worked for Indonesia?
Yeah, thank you very much for. I think it's I hear what Tom already mentioned previously. Yes, that's correct, because we are in the island country. So sometimes for the waste management, especially for the small island, is a very difficult. So it's why then what Tom mentioned previously about the business model is also very good, that if we can implement it in the small area, especially because we know that in Indonesia, for the production of the waste, as I mentioned previously, that in Indonesia, actually, we are produce a lot of waste, okay? So every day, because we are, the style of life is different maybe with another country, right? We are like cooking, we are like to have some ingredients, so then the production of the waste is a little bit higher compared to another city, I think, okay? Because in here, we are produced as every day around 0.5 kilogram per person per day to 0.7 kilogram per person per day. I think it's a lot compared to another city. Then for what mentioned previously about the infrastructures for the solid waste management, especially will be different from one city to another city or one island to another island. What Anya previously mentioned in the south of the Sulawesi, maybe the problem will be different with the big city in Surabaya or in Jakarta. So every of the island, they have a different problem about this solid waste management. So in why, like Tom previously mentioned, this is a locally will be solved in their area, because what I means that for the local government, they need to take care about their authority, especially because for the small island is a very difficult if they are compete with the big island for management of the system. So we cannot what we call it, make everything is the same for the solid waste management in one area to another area. It's not like a land-based management system, but because we are the island. So right now, yeah, and Tom already mentioned, we just started. So I think Tom is, because we are just started in this year, we would like to do like the management in a small island in the East Java. We would like to analysis and also has some of the management system in that area, and also how we also using the GIS or remote sensing for analyze the leakage of the plastic to that area. So this is, we would like to develop the model in East Java, a small island in the East Java. Then we hope that we can also share together with you, Tom, and then after that we can discuss about the possibility to enhance the model in one island to another island, because it will be depend on the local cultures, local community. It's going to depend from one area to another area.
It seems like with everything, you really do need to sort of have a pilot, you know, like a small pilot that you can test, you know, and then learn from that. And if you fail, you know, you try and do better. So it seems that what is happening. But, you know, let's talk about responsibility, right? So, I mean, you know, private sectors taking on some responsibility, researchers trying to study this. Who you know, like who should take responsibility for all this? You know, like, is it the government? Is it the corporations? I mean, is it the consumer? Let's go to Stefan. Who should shoulder the responsibility, Stefan?
Well, building on what Wawa just rightfully said, I think all of us and all of the institutions that you just mentioned have to. That's us as consumers, of course, because we make a choice that affects manufacturing and that affects well, politics, and with that regulation. Of course, regulators or politicians have the duty to guide for that process and ensure that there's a safe use of materials as well, and industries have the responsibility, the corporate responsibility, and doing business in a way that is sustainable. And but all these things are not unconnected, and from that perspective, as Barbara just mentioned, some things work in some situations and other things work in others. I think the big risk that we still are only in the process to understand is what the unintended consequences of some of these solutions are. And Tom mentioned that when he alluded to carbon offsetting, there can definitely be unintended consequences. And so when looking into that systematically, I strongly believe we need an approach that covers everything, from looking into ways that minimize the amount of waste that is produced, whether that is by new materials, by thinking about biodegradable materials with all the risks that might exist there, bio-based biodegradable materials that are better recyclable, so that basically all of these prevent waste to be generated first, so it can't be mismanaged then as well if it doesn't exist. Then of course the whole area of waste management, in order to make sure it doesn't get mismanaged and it doesn't end up in the environment, and Tom and Anya alluded to that to quite some detail. And the third, then, what do we do with all that waste that already sits in the environment? And we know this is several hundred million metric tons that are already in the environment. So that's a significant legacy that even, you know, in the COVID extreme scenarios, that we would have all been wiped out and we wouldn't have any further shedding of plastics into the environment. This is huge, and this is something that will stay in there independent of what we do, and we need to find solutions for that as well, of course.
Right. So Stefan, I mean, I got a statistic that you say that 80% of all ocean plastic actually comes from rivers. So that's another data point that's terrifying. Have you seen any pilot or any solution that has been implemented that gives you hope that at least a sliver of the problem can be solved? Can you give us one example of a solution?
Yeah, one really, it's a very small scale example, but it's widely distributed, so I'm hopeful for it. And that is, we run a program that is called the 100 Plastic River Program, which is rolled out across the world, where we work with citizens to collect plastic and sediments, well, water and sediment samples from rivers, and analyze how much plastic is in there. And of course, that information is fed back to the participants of that. And there have been cruises with people on boats doing that together with coastal communities, and the power of information. So by people seeing not just visually how much macroplastic that they see easily, but also how much microplastic is around them and what the potential sources for that are, makes people really stop, people think, and people making that first step in being willing to think about changing behavior. And then of course for individuals, that's in the first instance consumer behavior, and waste management behavior. And I find that is extremely encouraging. Lots of small scale solutions that have a global impact.
Fantastic. So 100 Plastic Rivers. So we have questions from the audience, and I'm going to go to Anya for this. It says, what role does research play in comprehensively finding solutions?
So research would come in from all the various disciplines around this, what we call a wicked problem. So this would be a problem that akin to climate change is being looked at from the technology side, from the social sciences. And so it's really important to understand certainly the health implications, and understand the potential alternatives that we have, such as biopolymers and alternative delivery methods and improvements in recycling content and so on. But there's so much more. There's innovation in design. How do we create better product design. The behavioral science has been fully engaged around shifting consumer behavior and implementing educational material. I almost feel like there's a disproportionate element to it. From the economic space, going back to what Tom has mentioned, we have to design a better economic model, specifically in this space of plastic credits, where value is now being put back into the system. But however, carefully using corporate sustainability and business sustainability research to ensure that these offsets and these credits are not being used as a social license to operate and produce more plastic and to continue business as usual. And that doesn't include then more anthropology and psychology type of research that can understand what solutions work better in different contexts. Some waste management solutions, as we mentioned, rural and urban areas are completely different, but also culturally appropriate applications and interventions. And so I think this comes in from nearly every discipline involved, and the role of research is to stay with it and to really use data and empirical evidence to kind of shed the light and also again these aspects of responsibility. You know, we really this element of consumer responsibility has been, you know, in my opinion, really disproportionately highlighted to the institutional frameworks that are required, all the policy changes that are needed.
Okay,
and
so the role of research is actually to help people understand how you can have a better economic model around waste management, basically to understand that situation. I know it's very complex, but you know, the research does lead to an outcome of helping people try to find solutions. Have you seen any solutions out there, like one solution that you've seen, like what Stefan was saying about 100 plastic rivers, that has given you hope?
I derive some real recent hope around smaller innovation and more startup-based ideas that are underpinned by circular economy. The whole notion that you can take discarded, for example, fishing nets and turn them into stock feed for carpet fibers, which is happening with, say, a company called Interface, at the same time creating livelihoods and income for local communities, and using these you know, fundamental principles of keeping resources going to really enhance economic opportunities, but at the same time minimize or decouple from fossil fuels, so minimize virgin plastic. I do think the recent developments around the circular economy are very strong, and we have business models and business model innovation to support that, to show that it's actually a very strong business case for it. That there is you know, in addition to environmental benefits, these are actually incredibly lucrative value propositions.
So I think, yeah, it's really encouraging to see sort of startups. I think, you know, on the ground in Singapore, we are also seeing some startups dealing with food waste, for example, and, you know, Tom's example of 7 Clean Seas. So I'm just going to go to, we have a lot of questions coming in. So does a global estimation of marine plastic and debris on beaches and rivers exist at the scale of Indonesia? Can somebody answer that? Does a global estimation of marine plastic and debris on beaches and rivers exist at the scale of Indonesia?
So maybe I try to answer this one, because from our national action plan, for the national action plan to for marine plastic debris, actually the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and also coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment in Indonesia, they already try to have a baseline to calculate how many plastic leaked from Indonesia into the water in 2017. Around 0.62 million tons of the plastic that leaked to the water from Indonesia in 2017. This is based on their data, and for the National Action Plan, then Indonesia, based on that data, already mentioned in their action plans that there will be reduced amount of the plastic leakage, about 70%, okay, about 70% in 2025. Okay, so this is what our government already do it about the measure of the baseline value of the how many plastic that already linked to the water, especially for the river and ocean.
Okay, that's very encouraging to reduce that amount by 70%. So Stefan, we have a question coming in from about rivers. You know, we were talking about the 80% of all ocean plastic coming from rivers. So the question is there more information on how this plastic affects rivers?
Yes, yes. It's a global average number, the 80%, and there are areas where it's more than 80%. There will be areas where it might be slightly less, but on average it's around that. These are numbers based on global modeling results, and models are always only as good as the data you put in there. We have the typical rubbish in, rubbish out rule. If you don't have good data to put into model, you can't expect good results as well. That's one of the reasons why we run the 100 Plastic Rivers program. We start to understand a lot about the impacts that plastic have on rivers and on the ecosystem services that rivers provide. And we strongly advocate to see rivers not just as networks of water that flow through the landscape, but that interconnect terrestrial, like the land and the sea. And plastics have a significant impact on plastic waste, has significant impact on soils and the soil functions for agriculture, etc. as well, because there's a lot of plastic use in agriculture. That's one of the additional mechanisms that brings plastics into rivers. One is mismanaged waste, the other is the use in agriculture, solid waste fertilizers, etc. So we have it very close, much closer than in the oceans on our own entry into our own food web, and basically very close home. And while we know that rivers provide 80% of plastics that go out to the oceans, we also know that as I mentioned, more than 90% of the plastics that get mismanaged plastic waste that gets generated every year doesn't see the ocean. It stays in our rivers. It stays in the sediments of the rivers, in the river banks, in the river corridors. It stays behind the big reservoirs and dams that are built on large rivers in particular. So and it stays there and it starts to degrade. And with that degradation, it releases additives. There are a lot of additives to plastic, from flame retardants, so that our whatever fleece jumpers don't catch fire, or when they can't catch fire and they can't burn, or just additives that give plastics their desired properties. Some of them are endocrine disrupting, so they really mess around with our hormone system, like bisphenol A is a very famous one that you often see in this BPA-free stickers on material. And when that starts to leach out, it can have immediate impact on the functioning of ecosystems and on our own health. And we start to understand that these are, of course, very complex, because these are contaminants that for whom plastics is not the sole source, so they can come from other sources as well. So to identify the proportion that plastic adds there is still in progress.
So we have another question about another terrifying issue. So you just terrified me, Stefan, again.
Sorry.
And we have another about reusable shopping bags. So I have heard that reusable shopping bags use more materials and are actually worse for the environment than a single-use plastic bag. What would be the best solution in everyday life? Tom, can I ask you that question?
Yeah, sure. So this is a very, very common talking point for a lot of people who are on both sides of the discussion of ocean plastic pollution. I would say it goes far to say it's very contentious, but essentially, there has been many studies. Ben, my co-founder, and I were actually sat through a United Nations kind of presentation of a new meta-analysis on LCA studies, life cycle analysis studies, looking at plastic bags, single-use plastic bags versus kind of cotton reusable bags in different materials and various different things. And just for the sake of our viewers, a life cycle analysis is essentially looking at a plastic bag and looking at all of the emissions and energy that goes into it, and then comparing that between bag A, bag B, bag C, depending on what it's made from. A lot of people will, of course, they'll go out and they'll buy a reusable bag. Maybe it's a cotton bag, for example. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that that's taken a lot of effort, a lot of emissions in various different forms to make. A lot more than that single-use plastic bag, which is actually quite eco-friendly if you're only going to use it one time. And it gets really complex because if you want your reusable bag to be more eco-friendly than your single-use plastic bag, then actually you've got to use it between 50 and 150 times for that to be the case. Now, that should be kind of the standard anyway, because sustainable kind of reusable products last a long time. They're meant to be a bag for life. If it rips, stitch it up. I mean, that's the whole point. People need to realize that the most unsustainable thing is to buy a sustainable product and not use it enough. So
I like that. Right. Okay. You know, that's such a good advice. Okay. So now I think we are running into time, but I want to, so, you know, like I'm quite encouraged by what I've heard about, you know, how Indonesia is planning to cut by 70%, you know, the tons of plastic that's being leaked into, you know, the system. We have you and Anya talking about like plastic offsetting and plastic credits. You know, we have Wawa talking about East Java pilot, you know, that has the potential to maybe show people what can be done at the real sort of grassroots level. We have initiatives like the 100 Plastic Rivers to spread awareness and educate consumers. I think that's good, you know, and lobbying of governments, right? So can I ask you, each of you, right, because you've kind of terrified us with a lot of data and can you talk about like one thing that gives you hope for the future? So let's go to Wawa first. Like one thing that gives you hope for the future, because Indonesia is such a young country, you know, very dynamic, very young population. What gives you hope for the future?
Yeah, hope for the future, as I mentioned previously to you about the sustainability. So I think for us, especially for the plastic waste, people right now already, I think some of the people, especially in a big city and then in a more big island, they understand about this kind of problem, about how dangerous of the single-use plastic, especially, and some of the local government already banned this kind of the plastic use. Okay, so I think this is one of the hope that we can what we call it, that we believe that we can tackling this problem, especially because we have responsibility, and we know that we have responsibility, and every people, including, like previously mentioned, community, governments, and also the researchers and all of the stakeholders. I think we already moved step by step how to tackling about this kind of problem. Okay, right. So even right now, actually, if I have a chance to talk about the problem of COVID-19, because the COVID-19 right now, I think will have a little bit big impact on the plastic reduction. Because for case study in Surabaya city right now, for the because we have the waste bank, so the waste banks usually will be collect the valuable waste from the community, and because of the COVID-19, everything was closed. So it's then plastic will be goes to the landfill area, and even sometimes maybe released to the environment. And then the other problem is for the informal sector, especially because we are also work with the informal sector. They right now cannot sell off their waste to the industry or to large scale of enterprises because they are stopped to receive the plastic waste from the informal sector. Because of this condition, their industry is not work very well. And then also the problem with the price of the plastic. Okay, so then they are stopped to receive the plastic from the informal sector. And I already analyzed this in Surabaya city, in part of the city, that this have a big impact on the community especially, and also for the recycling of plastic, because right now they are stopped to work, so it's then means that the plastic composition will become increased in the environment. So this is a big problem with the COVID. So we hope that it will be finished soon, so then we also can be what we call it doing business as usual. Then the process will be started again for reducing of the plastic, especially.
Right. I mean, they do say that this period has definitely brought together better collaboration across multiple stakeholders in every industry. Every industry is seeing this, you know, phenomenal collaboration. So I hope that it is happening in, you know, this in this environment of plastic pollution and waste management. So that's positive from Indonesia. Good, better local awareness, governments coming in to implement and coming up with policies. That's good. What about Anya? What about you? What gives you hope?
So from an optimistic view, I'd like to say the problem of ocean plastic and plastic pollution, it's resolvable. It's a tractable issue. So there are multiple solutions and we actually know what they are. And that is actually incredibly encouraging. We know the different areas that need to be addressed, including at the source, including on the at the end of pipe, and including in legislative frameworks. And there's big change in societal response. Everyone's very aligned on this. It's not, we're not experiencing similar kind of polarization that the climate change issue or debate has resulted globally. There are very few individuals globally who are not supportive to reduce plastic pollution and certainly ocean plastic. The actions that are taken are measurable. And so there's quick visible changes, and that's really encouraging. But this really requires this inclusive leadership. And this is valued regardless of region, of provincial, regional, national level, whether in Indonesia or in Australia or in the US. And these responses that are adaptive through innovation, through these different economic, potentially more functional economic systems. They really bring me, you know, kind of that lift from the reality of it, which the reality of it is frightening, as we discussed earlier. And ultimately, it is this is an issue of our global consumer culture, and this is a reflection of essentially where we collectively as a whole have been going for a long time, and all our commodities are ending up as waste and sadly in rivers and oceans. I think from a business perspective, just like with COVID, many businesses stepped up, and in Australia, they were asked to develop a COVID safe plan. This is an extraordinary opportunity to develop plastic stewardship plans, things that differentiate the businesses, and then certainly some of the actually packaged consumer goods companies that are directly related to this massive issue to shift and adjust. But from just regular business side of things, I think this notion of plastic stewardship can actually bring tremendous amount of results. So
that's very positive, Anya. I like that. You know, I mean, everybody's coming up with, you know, SG clean, you know, branding and all that, right? And so why not a plastic stewardship that says, you know, this is the time to sort of champion that. So that's excellent. That gives me hope. It is a trackable problem, and the results are measurable. So that gives me hope. Stefan, over to you. What gives you hope?
You're on mute, Stefan.
I was hoping we wouldn't ever say that.
No. My main reason for hope is to see this diversity of people that really are enthusiastic about reducing plastic pollution and in their own lives and on a very personal level, to businesses, corporations, research, regulators. But that basically, and I totally agree with what Anya said, that it seems to be an issue that is wider understood and sees almost less controversy than climate change. Everyone has an opinion about plastic pollution. My 6-year-old daughter has, my 95-year-old grandmother has. It's not always good, maybe. There's lots of different opinions around, of course, and we still need to find a lot of answers that guide questions, etc. But I think the diversity of opinions that comes together there, and of viewing points of how we can try finding solutions to this really helps, and has proven already to not be in just a straw fire, you know, that when plastics got into the awareness of the public, lots of people said, yeah, you know, that interests people this year, maybe next year, and then they stop being interested in it. And evidently that has not been the case, and I think one reason is that we see the impacts in our everyday life, every day and day, and that keeps people engaged, and that makes me hopeful for the future, that they stay engaged. And even during the pandemic, like right now, it's encouraging how early the waste that is produced due to the handling of the pandemic comes into the public mind. That of course everyone thinks first of how can we ensure that people are living safe and that people are staying healthy. But the next step almost is people thinking, what are the consequences of the increased use of single-use plastic? How can we mitigate that? How can we find creative solutions to deal with that additional burden of single-use plastic waste from the medical sector that is used now a lot in a household environment as well. And that means it is so present in the public awareness and in the awareness of regulators and healthcare providers as well, that I think that makes me quite hopeful.
Yeah.
And I have to apologize. I need to run to a lecture.
Yeah.
Statistics, super interesting. But
record it for us, Stefan. So we have a couple more questions from the audience. Stefan, do you have to leave us? You have to leave us?
I have to leave you, unfortunately,
all right, okay.
But I'm more than happy to answer any questions afterwards if you want to send them to me.
Fantastic. Yeah, we will send those questions to you. Stefan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lecture.
Bye.
All right, go spread the good word. All right, and so we have a couple of questions. What future studies are you doing, Anya and Wawa? Have you planned in this area? And Tom, how do you see 7 Clean Seas helping? So let's go to Wawa first. And what future studies are you planning in this area?
Yeah, as I mentioned previously, and especially for the management of the solid waste in the island area, and we have a multidiscipline researchers there, especially like Tom say, for the business and also for the material itself, and also technology, how to clean up. And also the monitoring system for the leakage of the plastic in that area. So this is what we will be done in the future. Okay, and Anya?
So I have 3 different studies that I'm starting and in the process of. The first one is looking at transition to sustainable packaging by the food and beverage sector. And I'm specifically looking, it's a systematic review across the industry to see how companies are addressing plastic pollution and specifically single-use packaging and waste management in countries with minimal waste management infrastructure. So that's so we're looking at 70 different multinational companies all selling to regions like Southeast Asia and other emerging economies. That's the first one. The second one is actually and this is very exciting because I'd like to talk to Tom later, is we're actually looking at a plastics credit economic model and really keen to pilot it and do a full economic study on testing out the market for developing a functional working financial mechanism to ensure that there's a way forward. Again, you know, with really keeping in mind that it is used for good and not used to continue business as usual. And the second one is very Indonesia focused, and that's working with specifically across Eastern Indonesia, but with communities to look at what would be the appropriate alternative delivery methods, refillable, reusable models, as well as opportunities for sustainable supply chain. So it's really a supply chain analysis around responsible packaging.
Wow, that's a lot of studies ahead, but very positive, you're right, and really, really solid, solid stuff that you know, companies can get their hands into. So I think that's fantastic. We look forward to those studies. We have a question for Wawa. For, you know, what are the main strategies that the Indonesian government is planning to introduce to reduce plastic entering rivers by 70% by 2025?
Yeah. Okay. For the Indonesia government, especially, they have four main strategy that they would like to implement it. Okay, the first one is how to change the behaviors of the people, because change of the behavior is very, very important for this one. And the second one, reduce of the land-based leakage plastic, as my research previously, especially for this part. And also the third one is like related to the how to manage sea leakage base also. So how to prevent that is already in the sea or in the ocean. And the last one is about the partnership and also law enforcement, because right now the governments, as Anya previously mentioned about the extended producer responsibility, the EPR, and then government already have this kind of the regulation right now, and then will be implemented for 10 years. Then the big industry need to responsible to take care of their waste, especially to and any things that reduce or taking back, or they need to treat it their waste especially, and then the government give the time about 10 years to finish this kind of the problem.
Okay. Thank you. So Tom, I think we're going to have to sum up. And so Tom, why don't I hand it over to you to connect the dots, because the last question is, how is 7 Clean Seas helping, and what gives you hope for the future as well? So over to you, Tom.
Yeah, for sure. So what gives me hope for the future is the youth and the innovation. It's happening everywhere. There is so many tech solutions, physical solutions popping up. In Indonesia, we worked a little bit with a tech solution called Smash.id that's helping people kind of quantify the plastic they've got, and it tells them which waste bank they can go to deposit that and get their money back. So that's what gives me hope for the future. In terms of how I want 7 Clean Seas to be an instrumental part of the history of trying to help kind of solve this solution, is I really want us to be an integral component to building this financial model, this kind of plastic offsetting market. We started kind of by accident in 2018 with plastic offsetting, and we've been developing it a long time, and it's now nice to see kind of international standards popping up, or at least being made. They don't exist yet, but they're starting to happen. And the kind of reception that we're getting from business is changing fundamentally as well, which is nice. Because if we can create this model, this financial economic model, then all of a sudden, it doesn't matter where you are, you can replicate this. It is a case of looking at kind of the work that we're doing at 7 Clean Seas and be like, okay, well, they've managed to fund a project somehow. Like, how is that? Oh, it's plastic offsetting, it's credits. How does that work? And can I implement it to my project, to my infrastructure kind of project? We have our own projects going on. We've got 2 projects going on. One is a river plastic technology, recovery technology, which is high volume. So we're looking at 1,500 kilotons per annum, which is a huge volume. Trying to bridge the gap, because the market at the moment is low volume, low cost, high volume, high cost. We want to be high volume, low cost, which is very difficult, but it is getting there. So that's exciting. But then the main thing for us is to demonstrate plastic offsetting. And we're doing that by building out a robust infrastructure in Bintan, Indonesia. In case you don't know Bintan, it's the island in Indonesia with the second most tourists after Bali. It's got 2.27 million tourists a year. It's super close to Singapore. I can almost see it from my window, if I'm being honest.
Oh, we can't go there.
No, not allowed because of COVID restrictions. It's so annoying. We've got a team of 22 people over there who were kind of furloughed because of COVID-19 from the hospitality industry. We saw an opportunity to provide employment to this sector, to vulnerable people, to be able to go out and actually do environmental cleanups. We're now looking to build a materials recovery facility, but not like you've ever seen before. It's going to be a big, beautiful bamboo structure. It's going to have a materials sorting facility at the back, but an auditorium, a workshop, a cafe at the front, because it's all about community engagement, getting the community to come down. They can even buy bulk items or coffees with plastic that they bring into us, a little bit like a waste bank. And really what we want to do is be a walking example of how plastic offsetting can be an economically profitable business model for the companies who decide to go down that road. But off the back of it, that you can build these huge kind of projects that have infinite kind of environmental and social impact. It needs to be the triple bottom line at the end of the day. And I'm going to finish off with this, but people not in the sustainability world, like the holy grail is the triple bottom line. It's people, it's planet, it's profit. If a company can help people, help the planet, and still make profit, then it's got a place in the future. And that's what everyone in every country should be aspiring to do. Thank you, Tom. I mean, I like the way that you are sort of bridging the gap between, you know, the community, like Wawa was talking about, and Anya, you know, doing work in South Sulawesi. You know, it's the local communities that are bearing the brunt of this problem, and you are actually, you know, kind of creating a solution for them with a very cool bamboo cafe. I got to go and visit that bamboo cafe one day, you know, and having and wrapping it around, you know, solutions. I think that's fantastic. And then at the same time, you're bringing in big tech to try and solve, you know, to solve the plastic waste in rivers. You know, I like that, the fact that you say high volume and low cost. Sounds like a low cost airline, actually. That's a low cost airline model. So that gives me hope for the future. So thank you so much for the discussions. And Tom, you know, I while you were speaking about, you know, and we were talking about all the startups that are coming up with all the solutions, I think that 7 Clean Seas should run a startup pitch the way that Web in Travel runs startup pitches, you know, and encourage entrepreneurs to come up with ideas and present those ideas to you for you know, for coaching and mentoring. I think that that is one way to do it, you know, to push it from the grassroots. If there's anyone out there watching who wants to get involved, contact us. We're easily contactable. Look, we're in this together. We're willing to help anybody that's kind of wanting to share this journey with us. I think it's the next generation that are going to really get a hold of this. Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much, Anya from Brisbane. Say hi to Brisbane for us. We can't get there yet, but we will one day. We'll see you in. And Wawa in Surabaya. Terima kasih.
Thank you. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. And Tom, thank you so much for initiating this panel discussion. It's been my pleasure to moderate this really important panel on a truly critical topic for our planet. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.